Welcome back to Rhythm Reading Bootcamp Season 1. This is episode 5, where we are going to talk about altering basic note values. Now, so far in this series, we've talked about how to practice rhythm reading effectively and why it's important. We looked at basic note values, whole notes, half notes, quarter notes. We looked at eighth notes. We looked at eighth note rests and some basic syncopation ideas. If you haven't looked at those things, it might be worth going back watching those episodes to check that you haven't glossed over any things that you might not be 100% certain on. Short sales pitch: if you haven't bought the book already, hit the link below, buy the book. That's all I'm going to say. In this episode today, we're going to look at how we can take our basic note values and alter them to create different rhythms. And this usually happens by using dots. We're going to start out with our basic rhythmic pyramid, and we'll see at the top we've got our whole note, which is 4 beats. We cut that in half, we get our half notes, which are 2 beats each. We cut that in half again, we get quarter notes, 1 beat each, our basic unit of pulse in 4/4 time. And if we split that quarter note, we get eighth notes, half a beat each. Now, obviously that's not the whole story, rhythmically speaking. What if we need a note that lasts for a different amount of time? We have a few different ways in music notation of altering our basic note values to create new rhythms. And the first thing that we're going to look at is dotted notes. A dot to the right of a note head extends the note's written value by 50% of the original note value. So if we take a half note and make it a dotted half note, it's gone from being 2 beats to 3 beats. Half of 2 is 1, 2 plus 1 is 3. There we go. Now, this system of extending a note's written value using a dot to the side can also be applied to the associated rests. So let's put our dotted half notes and dotted half note rests into practice. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as you might expect, a dotted half note worth 3 beats crops up an awful lot in 3/4 time. And as you might expect, there are lots of examples in the book which you can buy down below, which will give you plenty of practice at 3/4 time, but we're not going to cover it here. Sorry. Let's think about dotting our quarter note there. So if we have a quarter note usually worth 1 beat, our basic unit of time, and we dot it, it's going to effectively be a quarter note plus an eighth note, so 1.5 beats. So if I play a dotted quarter note on beat 1 of the bar, it's going to last for all of beat 1 and the first half of beat 2. So my next attack on the string will be on the and of 2. So if I count myself in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4. Very common rhythmic figure that's worth getting the hang of. Again, take your time with the exercises. Make sure that if you are someone that likes to tap their foot, you can do that and it not be affected by what you're playing or what you're counting out loud. You need to have that separation of voice, bass, and foot to be sort of rhythmically effective out in the real world. Let's have a go at putting these dotted quarter notes into practice. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've just dealt with dotted half notes, 3 beats, dotted quarter notes, 1.5 beats. What happens if you start dotting other note values? You can, of course, dot a whole note, but that would only really appear in 6/4 on time signature with more beats than that in the bar, which, let's face it, most of us are not really dealing with on a regular basis, if ever. So we're not going to deal with a dotted whole note now. Dotted eighth notes are definitely a thing, but as soon as we get into dotted eighth notes, which should be worth 3/4 of a beat, we have to start dealing with the 16th note subdivision, which goes beyond the scope of this series and is covered in Rhythm Reading Bootcamp Vol.2 and Season 2, the link for which should be floating around here and in the video description. Now next we're going to deal with a different sort of dot, which also alters the note's value, but instead of making it longer, it makes it shorter. This is called a staccato dot, staccato being the Italian term for notes that are short, detached, choppy, not held for their full value. And the way to differentiate a staccato dot from the other sort of dot, which we just covered, which extends the note, is the staccato dot is always directly above or below the note head. It's never to the side. If the dot is to the side, it makes the note longer. If the dot is directly above or below the note head, it makes it shorter. Now the common convention with staccato notes is that you play them for half of their written value. So a staccato quarter note will sound like a regular eighth note. And again, it's going to take a little bit of practice, although this is a relatively simple concept. Trying to play them and keep them consistent in terms of like the volume and the attack and the length might take a little bit of practice. It demands a lot from the left hand to play effectively in this manner. So let's just try that in a very basic example. If we look here, we've got a bar of staccato quarter notes. They're going to sound like regular eighth notes on each beat with an eighth note rest. Let's try that. One, 2, 3, 4. So it's the same sound, really, or it should be the same sound in an ideal world, but it's written differently. And the whole point of these staccato dots is to make life easier for the reader. I think we'd agree that it's much easier to read a quarter note with a dot on top of it at speed than it is to sort of decode a forest of eighth notes and eighth note rests. So that's the reason for them. So that's the wonderful world of dots. Again, in book 1 of the Rhythm Reading Bootcamp series, you will find lots of exercises to take you through the staccato dot and master it. Next episode is going to be the last one in the series, and we're going to talk about another way of extending note values, which is the tie.